Hey guys, what's going on? Andy Baker here of andybaker.com and owner of Kingwood Strength and Conditioning. And we're going to be coming to you today off of the platform with a deadlift video. And more specifically, we're going to be talking about common form errors that I see that result in injury on the deadlift, and more importantly, what you can do to avoid those errors in form to keep yourself safe on the platform. My experience with lifters and clients and injuries as it relates to the deadlift, the issue has never been load, okay? So I've never actually seen a lifter get hurt strictly because the load was too heavy and something broke or something gave way, okay? I'm not saying it doesn't happen. I'm not saying that you don't have a case where you've seen that happen. I just haven't seen it in my 10 years here. So what I have seen is a lot of lifters get hurt on lights that were below maximal with incorrect technique. And I think a lot of times what happens is that by the time a lifter gets to his work set weights, he's a little bit more dialed in on his form and technique. The potential for injury is pretty firm in the back of his mind, and so he's doing everything he can to make sure he's doing everything correct at those heaviest weights so that he doesn't get injured. But what happens a lot with the warm-up weights is that the lifters just aren't giving these warm-up sets the respect that maybe they deserve, and they're just kind of haphazardly going about their business on the warm-up sets, and lo and behold, they get injured even with a sub-maximal lighter weight. That being said, let's get started. I'm going to show you 4 different errors that a lot of people do that can potentially lead to injury. The easiest way to get hurt on a deadlift is to do anything that places the barbell forward of the midfoot. And that can happen at a maximal weight, it can happen at a submaximal weight. Okay, so a guy that can deadlift 405 that's warming up can get hurt at 315 by being sloppy with his technique and trying to pull 315 off of the floor well forward of the midfoot. Okay, so we always want to maintain that relationship between the barbell and the midfoot and making sure that our shoulders are out over the bar. Okay, now the easiest way to get the barbell forward of the midfoot is to do exactly what I demonstrated in the video, which is to drop your hips too low. Okay, when you drop your hips too low, it's going to close the knee angle a bit. It's going to push the shins forward, and oftentimes that pushing of the shins forward is going to push the barbell forward of the midfoot. Okay, it'll feel like the barbell is in the right place because it's still up against the shins. But when you go to pull off of the floor, what happens is that knee angle opens up, the shins come back off of the bar, and the bar is left there kind of out over the toes, and that's where it wants to leave the ground, is out in front of the midfoot over the toes, because you pushed it there when you dropped your hips down too low. Okay, so you want to keep your hips up a little bit higher on the deadlift so that the bar is set over the midfoot and it never moves off of that point. Okay, so once you get the barbell settled over the middle of the foot on your setup technique, don't do anything that's going to move the bar off of that point. And that most assuredly is dropping your hips down too low. A lot of guys have a picture in their head that they're trying to squat the weight off of the ground. You've heard a lot of uninformed people say silly things like lift with your legs, not your back, and that is in fact almost irrelevant to the discussion. You're going to be using your legs and your back for the deadlift. What muscle group you use is less important than the position of the barbell to the midfoot, to making sure that your leverage is good. And if your leverage is good, the barbell stays over the midfoot 9 times out of 10. Even if you do everything else wrong, if you keep barbell over midfoot, you're not going to get hurt. A lot of times guys do this because they're anticipating the weight being heavy. So as a coach, you really have to watch your lifter for this, because I have clients and I've had lifters over the years that will not do this form error at warm-up weights. They will do it only when they get to their heavier weights and they're anticipating the weight being heavy. It's just kind of a mental glitch that goes off where the lifter, instead of wanting to pull, they're trying to explode into the bar and pull hard into the bar, but their body misinterprets that cue And what happens is instead of pulling with force on the bar, they instead just shoot their hips up early. And in essence, what that does is it pulls the quads out of the movement, and it forces you to try to lift that load with mainly just your hamstrings and lower back. And now you're trying to lift a maximal load with less muscle mass, and that can lead to injury. Most of the time it doesn't. I'd say the first issue of shooting the barbell forward of the midfoot is mainly what causes injury. Most of the time that technique just causes a missed lift, or if you get the lift, you did so exerting far more energy on that repetition than you should have. What we saw was a demonstration of a lifter who just fails to set their lower back. All right, and again, this is very common. I'll say it's much more common among men than women. Most women know how to set their lower back fairly well, although you have seen there's some pretty bad cases across the internet of some women doing some Halloween cat type deadlifts. But it is fairly common. Sometimes it's common because lifters just aren't doing it, so they're just mentally they're not settled into their technique, and so it's just a step that they forget to do. Other times it's because they have a hard time doing it. So it's very, very common that you get a new lifter into their gym, especially a male, especially some older males that just cannot set their back well. Okay, they just don't have the proprioceptive awareness or whatever it is. They just don't have that mind-muscle connection with their lumbar spine to be able to set their back into really good extension, and so that's something that you really have to watch. Now, one good little trick to look at is the crinkle on the shirt. Okay, so if you will look at if a guy is wearing a fairly tight-fitting cotton shirt and he goes to set his back into extension, even if the back doesn't set into a nice, pretty extension right there, if he's activating those muscles correctly, then the crinkle on the material on the shirt, it'll kind of wrinkle up a little bit rather than being flat and smooth. And that's a pretty good indicator that he's doing what he needs to do with those muscles and that he'll be safe to pull his next rep. A lot of people have kind of a picture in their head that the way that the weight should be lowered back down to the floor is with their back straight. And so what they in turn do is they try to keep their back straight, and they lower the barbell back down to the floor by pushing their knees out in front of them. And what that in fact causes the system to do is to lower the bar down the thighs as it's sliding forward out and around the knees. And that's going to get the barbell well forward of the midfoot. And even with a very light load, that's a really good, quick way to injure yourself. The correct way to lower the barbell is to simply in reverse of how you lifted it. Okay, so just kind of push your butt back out of the way. Don't lower it down too slow. You don't want to drop and let it free fall, but it's just more kind of it's a controlled drop in a way, so there is not a slow eccentric on a correctly performed deadlift, and allow yourself to bend over and keep the barbell over the midfoot, and ideally keep your shoulders out in front of the bar, and you should be just fine lowering down and to set up for your next repetition.